Human Rights Watch has urged South Sudan to establish a hybrid court with the African Union to address human rights violations in that country. The rights body asked South Sudan to heed last week's call by the United Nations Security Council to support the protection of civilians and stop interfering with the UN peacekeeping mission's monitoring of human rights abuses in the country. In February, UN human rights experts asked South Sudan to make a genuine effort to restore stability, including bringing those who have committed atrocities to justice. In their report to the UN Human Rights Council, the experts cited growing levels of violence in recent months, with hundreds of civilians killed or displaced, and urged South Sudan to act swiftly to get the court up and running. South Sudan in January agreed to establish a hybrid court to prosecute human rights violations after years of delay. Nyagoah Tut Pur is South Sudan researcher in the Africa division of Human Rights Watch. She joins us now on Zoom from Nairobi in Kenya. Nyagoah, a very good evening to you. Thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Globe.
Thank you.
Now, suggestions of the establishment of the hybrid court, Nyagoah, has been met with much enthusiasm. But will it be the panacea for ending human rights violations in South Sudan?
Right. As you rightly put it, Simfiwe, this hybrid court was suggested and proposed all the way in 2015 by the African Union Commission of Inquiry in South Sudan. So it is only earlier this year in 2021 that the government formalized or finally approved establishing this court, even though it has appeared in two peace agreements, including the one that was signed in 2015 and the recent one signed in 2018. Now, this approval is significant, not only to show as a show of political will, but also for what this court could mean to victims and survivors of grave violations in South Sudan. So it is unclear yet whether this will result in any real and concrete action, but we have urged the government to move ahead and, for instance, conclude a memorandum of understanding with the African Union and to ensure that there is a proper and clear timeline in place for the court's establishment.
And the fact that a draft statute for the court and a memorandum of understanding to be signed with the AU has been pending since 2017, is this an indication perhaps that the country's authorities are quite reluctant in setting up this hybrid court?
I mean, certainly, if the court has, the court and other accountability mechanisms were proposed, it's almost been over 5 years ago. Certainly, it is an indication that the government has been unwilling to move ahead with this court, and not just to move ahead with the court, but to also ensure accountability for grave and serious violations. I mean, the conflict broke out in 2013, and between 2013 up to the signing of the most recent peace deal in 2018, senior commanders and senior leaders spearheaded abuses in various parts of the country. We've seen mass killing. We've seen sexual violence as a consistent feature of the conflict. We've also seen civilian populations being deliberately starved by opposing factions as a form of punishing them for their perceived allegiance to the other side. So over the last couple of years, there have been so many abuses that South Sudanese have witnessed and have gone through and have survived. And we are yet to see any will from the government to prosecute, including from the senior level, whether from the rebel side or from the government side. So there has been a huge reluctance to move ahead with accountability provisions, whether in the peace deal or accountability in itself. But now that the government has approved establishing the hybrid court, the Truth, Reconciliation and Healing Commission, as well as a reparations authority, this creates space to ensure that these mechanisms are actually established in the long run.
Now, Nyagoah, you were quoted by an American publication as having said the move by the South Sudanese government should be watched with caution. What do you mean by this?
Right. I mean, I think it's a show of cautious optimism that, yes, this is a huge and significant step, but we have seen commitments on paper for 5 years. And so now there is a cabinet approval where the Minister of Justice can move ahead with establishing the accountability mechanisms and calling the African Union to support in the establishment of the hybrid court, including its location, staffing, and other issues around its operationalization. But we've also seen instances where South Sudanese authorities have prioritized reconciliation and peace processes over genuine and credible criminal trials or accountability. So in as much as we want to celebrate and be glad that there is a step towards ensuring justice for the many victims of South Sudanese of atrocities, we're cautious in, we have to watch and see what the government does and also what the African Union does, because this is just not about the government. The African Union has also been ping-ponging on the creation of this court. They have not pressed the government hard on signing the memorandum or of getting legislation passed. So it's for both sides to actually ensure that this court is operationalized.
And we understand that the establishment of the transitional justice mechanisms had actually been put on hold due to a failure to adhere to the timelines of this peace agreement. What's delaying the implementation of the peace agreement? Will this perhaps not delay the formation of the new government and the completion of key appointments?
Very right, Simpiwe. Now, this peace deal was signed in 2018, and we're now in 2021, and there is only a partial formation of South Sudan's transitional government of national unity. The cabinet and state governments only got appointed last month, and county governments are not in place. The National Legislative Assembly has not been in place since 2018. Maybe South Sudan might be the only country in the world that does not have a functioning government, a functioning parliament for almost 2 years. I think it is ridiculous that a country can function like that. Yeah. But like you say, timelines for the peace deal have not been respected at all. We've also called on the African Union saying, look, the peace deal implementation is lagging behind and it is jeopardizing accountability and justice. You as the African Union have authority under the peace deal to unilaterally establish this court. And so you should take that opportunity to unilaterally establish this court. But the African Union has refused to take that route. But we continue to press that if South Sudan fails to take the necessary steps following this recent approval of the establishment, then the African Union needs to move ahead and unilaterally establish the court.
Now, the Commission of Human Rights on South Sudan laments that the government, instead of facilitating access to humanitarian organizations, but instead there is a constant bickering and constant, I would say, bureaucratic stalling of access and targeted attacks against humanitarian convoys, which makes it almost impossible to deliver emergency relief. So, is it perhaps correct to suggest that the government is complicit in the ensuing humanitarian crisis and is failing to protect its citizens?
Absolutely. The current humanitarian crisis in South Sudan is mostly man-made. And it is man-made because, one, of the continued conflict in the country. Although major fighting has declined, we're seeing parts of southern Equatoria, as well as these parts of the country that have now been affected by intercommunal or localized violence that is almost at the level of the conflict that we've seen over the last couple of years. So it is not only just because civilians are not able to, it is not only because civilians are getting targeted and attacked and are fleeing their homes, also the fact that a civilian livelihood is being destroyed. We've seen instances, like you put it, humanitarian assistance is being obstructed. In the case of Jonglei, where there is intercommunal violence between the Dinka, the Murle, and the Lonwer ethnic groups who are being assisted by various military and political actors in the national government. So we're seeing instances where these community militias are attacking and even raiding aid that is meant for their own communities. and not just for the other communities. So this is a challenge in itself. So there's also the big challenge in that the government has absolved itself of the responsibility not only to protect, but also to the responsibility of not only to protect, but also to deliver basic services to the South Sudanese, to ensure that there is a right to education, right to health, right to food. So we're seeing that it is the humanitarian agencies that are majorly providing all these services, and the government is taking a backseat.